Okay, let's start, shall we? Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this webinar on what land use modelers can learn from other disciplines. My name is Callum Brown. I'm one of the coordinators of the large-scale behavioural models of land use change working group, and we're associated with the Global Land Programme and also with the Analysis, Integration and Modelling of the Earth System project. And everybody is very welcome to join our working group through either of those organizations and to attend future webinars and so on. We have a very exciting lineup of 3 speakers for you today. We'll have 3 talks of 15 minutes each, followed by around 30 minutes of discussion at the end. And there'll also be time for direct questions after each talk. So if you have any questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat in the Google document that's shared in the chat, or just raise your hand in Zoom. So apart from that, I think we should get going. Our first speaker today is Professor Robert Axtell, who's a leading researcher in computational social science and agent-based modeling. He's chair of the Department of Computational Social Science at George Mason University in the United States, and also co-director of the Computational Public Policy Lab, among many other roles. Rob has worked on a variety of policy issues, and today we'll be highlighting how some of those experiences are applicable to land use modeling. And I'm very much looking forward to your talk, Rob. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Cam, for the invitation to speak, and I'll try to get through my slides here quickly and leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So I'll be talking today about large-scale models specifically, and how we use data to discipline those models. So hopefully you guys can see my slides here. And the first slide just says, at the present time, we have this very much a sea change going on in the social sciences, where we have so many more data streams than were available, say, even a decade ago. Experimental methods, people will know about things like experimental economics that are pinning down behavioral aspects of how people depart from rational behavior, for example, vis-a-vis economics. Vernon Smith won a Nobel Prize for this kind of work. But increasingly, we have things like large-scale randomized field trials. And for example, the recent Nobel Prize to Duflo et al. For this kind of work. My colleague from Santa Fe, Duncan Watts, has called the kinds of data that Google and Facebook get on all of us, he's called that digital exhaust, kind of transactional data from how we click through our web streams. And then what I'll talk today primarily about are going to be administrative data. That is data that are in a sense somehow comprehensive of the population that's being investigated. And then combining this big data, which we need to have a machine to do it with, is large scale computing. And so today I'm going to be focusing on agents, and I think that's what the thrust of today's session is about. But also networks, and then things like institutions, markets, firms, etc. And then the basic story I'm going to talk about today is that we can today represent whole social systems, whole economies, and I mean I think that the big challenge for our day is to say in the future people are going to have more data and more computing. What can we do today that's going to look still like good science to people of the in the future? Okay, so just for people who have not done age-based modeling before, don't know a lot about it. We're talking about a population of software agents typically representing people. Every agent has some explicit goals or objectives, and then has behavior in which they pursue those goals and objectives somehow, not necessarily rationally, but just purposively. There's always going to be some environment, social or physical, that evolves. And one key idea is that aggregate phenomena, social phenomena, emerge from the bottom up and can have different character than the microscopic structure. And today I'm going to talk about, in particular, the idea that ABMs have this property that oftentimes the amount of code you have to write, it can be quite compact, quite small. Whether I'm going to have 1,000 agents or 1,000,000 agents, I'm going to have the same code base. But at runtime, when I compile it, it's going to be small. But at runtime, I can ask for all available compute resources, so I can have a potentially very large runtime model, and so millions or billions of agents potentially. Okay, I was going to talk about two ABMs at large scale, but I want to have time to do one, and I can come back to the other one in questions if we want to. But with colleagues, I've worked extensively on building a model of the housing market bubble of the last decade, where we got data on individual houses, individual households, and then the mortgages that were in play. And the question was, what behaviors make bubbles? And with all the data on what actually happened, we were able to build a model of an entire city with every single housing tract represented. So that was roughly 1 million agents. What I'll talk about today, though, is a bigger model. It turns out we've been able to get data on all businesses in the U.S. It's essentially gleaned from tax records. And these data don't always have a lot of behavior in there, but they do have very crisp targets we want to hit with a model. And so by rendering this model, as in a way you'll see in a moment, with 10 to the 8th agents, that is 100 million workers, we're able to make some progress building a full-scale model of the U.S. economy. So what kind of data are in these tax records? Well, we have firm sizes according to many different metrics, employees, receipts, firm ages, lifetimes. Then we can slice and dice these data, like, how does a lifetime depend on the receipts or whatever it is? Lots of different ways to do that. Productivities, output per unit of input, growth rates, how does things change over time as longitudinal data as well as cross-sectional. Employment, who are the workers, how long do they stay in their job, et cetera, networks. I'm going to show you some examples of all this stuff. So anyways, the basic idea here is that a normal social science approach might be to run regressions on all these data, and that's been done extensively. But we're going to basically build a model where we say, let's try to hit all these data as targets. Let's try to reproduce this basic structure. So here's just a snapshot of 30 different measures of the patterns that are in these kinds of data. So when you get up to the level of having, in this case, we're going to be talking about 6 million firms with 100 million workers. There are basically gross patterns in the data. I'm just going to show you guys a couple of them, if you haven't seen them before. Show you a few of these. Okay, so firm sizes. So basically, in the US, there's one firm with 1 million employees, and there are progressively larger numbers of progressively smaller firms down to the modal firm size, which is 1 employee. Okay, so there's a smooth distribution that mediates between the Walmart with 1 million employees and 1 million firms with 1 employee. And I reported on this many years ago in a paper in Science magazine. And turns out you can slice and dice these data various different ways, and you can show them in different perspectives. And I won't spend much time on that today, except to say that we know a lot about this kind of gross regularity today at the level of the entire population of American firms, and many other countries have similar gross regularities. Labor productivity is another one where we see another kind of gross regularity. We have, for the most productive firms in America, we have this kind of pattern where we see blue is small firms, red is medium firms, green is large firms. We get this kind of power law talent productivity. Average productivity doesn't really make a lot of sense when we have these kind of power law tails. Now, the main reason I'm showing this is because this is going to be a target. We're going to basically say, can we build a model where this is our target? So we're going to get sizes, productivities. We also want to get ages and lifetimes. What I've done here is every colored line is a different year, where I just plotted what is the cross section of age distribution among these American firms. And then the dots refer to, we fit the Weibull distribution to this. First thing to say is that these are stationary, obviously, or nearly stationary, because all the curves are superimposed on each other. And then this is for ages, and then lifetimes is something different, but similar, right? Basically, when a firm goes out of business, it determines their lifetime. Anyway, so we have sizes, productivities, ages, lifetimes, and now entrants and exits. About 50,000 firms come and go every month in America with these kinds of size distributions. Well, this is entrants, and then here are exiting firms. So once again, we have all these very detailed, on the left-hand side, time series data, on the right-hand side, cross-sectional data. These are all going to be targets to hit. Growth rates, size at time t+1 over size at time t. This is just a measure of size. Sorry, this is a measure of how size changes, and whether you do it in logs or not. Once again, we just get out gross regularities, gross patterns, whether we do it for 1 year or 5 years. And these are going to be things we're going to try to hit. Networks. Increasingly, we have good data on buyer-supplier networks, which firms are buying from which other firms. This is a picture. This is not my work. This is a picture from a paper in PNAS. The red refers to the 3 big auto companies in America. The yellow refer to their suppliers, and then those companies have suppliers which are shown in the network, et cetera. Here, so this is among the Fortune 1,000 biggest companies in America. This is a buyer-supplier network. Anyways, so these are all, and this graph has a power law degree distribution. The main thing to say is that, well, I guess many of you guys are geographers, so I'll just make a final point here about just a bit of geography. Is that everyone knows the famous Professor Ziff's plot of how city sizes scale typically within a country, and this is usually done by a city size based on how many residents there are. We just show in the same bit of work that whether you do it by residents or by employees or by the number of firms, you're going to get the same answer, the same kind of shape to these distributions. Anyways, these are all the background. So when you have a very large swath of data, when you have a kind of comprehensive data, in this case from administrative sources, we can really talk about growing this entire population of, we can try to, can we reproduce those data? That's a simple question. So can we get 50,000 startups to emerge, 6 million firms overall, if we simply start with 120 million workers? And can we get Walmart to happen, with 1 million employees? So the question is, what microeconomic specifications can produce such such facts? And I'm just going to show you kind of the results of many years of work here, that a model with heterogeneous agents and that are put in a team, put in teams where there's increasing returns to scale, so-called. This is a team production environment, and they're going to kind of co-evolve their behavior to one another. They're going to pursue welfare improvements, but they're not really rational, because they're not going to look for the one firm when they decide to change jobs. They're not going to look for the one firm that can do that. They're going to the best place for them to go. They're going to look for a place where they can do better, and they're going to look by querying the social network, look and see what kind of jobs are available. This model, after extensive kind of estimation and calibration, can produce the right distribution of firm sizes by workers, by output, and then we can get things that we see in the real data, that output depends linearly on this on the amount of input we have. For example, we can get 1 million firms to the biggest firm to be 1 million in size. That's what my cursor is showing here, and we can get the fact that the average firm size is right around 20. 120 million workers and 6 million firms means the average firm size is 20. On the left is what the productivity distribution should be like. On the right is what we have coming out for small, medium, and large firms. Right shape, not exactly perfect, but it has the right qualitative behavior. Here now, the data are the lines for ages, and the dots are what's coming out of our model. So once again, we've calibrated the model to do pretty well on all these things. Growth rates are similar to what we had before, where we have the small firms have the most volatility in the growth rates, large firms less. It should look like this. It looks quite similar. Anyways, all this stuff is described in this book that we have coming out from MIT Press later in the year. And so once again, I can say much more about this, but I'm just kind of going through this in 15 minutes here to set the stage for maybe some things we can discuss. I want to go on just at the very end here to talk about how can we build models with 10 to the 8th agents, and just if nothing else, kind of like I'll share with you some of the pain we've had about what doesn't work. And I'm reporting here on roughly 4 or 5 or 6 years of kind of wasted time trying to get clouds to work, or trying to get vector supercomputers to work, and none of that works very well. Even things like MPI, that we found that software systems, a variety of these things that are claimed to work well for various kinds of large-scale computing, don't work well for large-scale agents, just because, well, the thing that you need for agents when you have densely interacting agents is to have them all on the same machine. So what we found that works well is a large flat memory space and some kind of operating system that's capable of addressing that memory space. A lot of processors. Basically, the more processors you can get, the better, and for a reason I'll mention in a minute. So we've actually gone to quite low level here, writing our own C++ code, OpenMP, Intel threading building blocks. We tried GPUs with some success. But the main thing to say is, at least from the US context, we can buy a machine with I've written here, 32 cores and 256 gigabytes of RAM. That's 10K range in the US, and 100 cores and a terabyte, maybe $25K. A machine like this gets us something like, we can equilibrate now a model with 10 to the 8th agents. It'll reach a steady state in about an hour. We're down to about 45 minutes now of compute time to do this. And how do we do that? Well, the final slide just shows this here, that every month in this model, we have a population of agents. We let them figure out how hard they're going to work and where they're going to work, which firms, etc. And so we basically do what we have this model that's forked for the agents. And then after the agents are going to be situated in their firms, then every firm gets runs and figures out how much it makes production, and then pays its employees. So every month we do this double fork join process, and this lets us get up to 100 million agents in 45 minutes. So the summary of this, and I apologize for going through it so quickly, but I'm trying to stay within my time limits here, is that with all these different data streams, it turns out that it's very hard to find a model that's going to produce exactly the right kind of data outcomes. And so this deeply grounded model in data, or the model that's grounded deeply in data, puts a lot of constraints on what is a satisfactory model, yes or no. And in particular, what we found is, for many years we actually were unable to work at full scale. And so we always had to scale things up. Like we had to say, how does our model output look like compared to the real economy, or that kind of thing? And we always had to rescale everything. And that was a pain in the butt, to be honest. So it turns out when you work at full scale, it just makes everything much easier, right? The output of the model should look exactly like the output of the real thing. And that makes life a lot easier. And one of the things just I just mentioned at the end here that kind of methodologically falls out of these kinds of models. So those of you guys who are social scientists, is that this is a model where we're all taught Nash equilibrium and game theory, et cetera. This is a model where at the microscopic level, the agents are always trying to improve their lot in life. They're always trying to find a new job, that kind of thing. So the microeconomic does not have an equilibrium configuration, but the macroscopic level is in fact approximately stationary here. And so that's very much like what we see in the data, right? We see the gross patterns in the data, and we're just trying to reproduce those here computationally. So with that, my 15 minutes are up, and I'll turn it back over to Callum.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob. Fascinating talk. We have a few minutes for direct questions now before another longer discussion session at the end of all of the speakers' presentations. So please raise your hand or type a question into the chat if you would like to ask Rob a question just now. While people are doing that, Rob, I had one quick question about calibration. You obviously matched an awful lot of empirical patterns with that model. How long did that take you? How much calibration did you have to do?
So, one of the amazing things about working with these kind of deep level data columns is that many of the conventional estimation techniques are not very useful because, for example, you would say, when you have multiple objectives, you would say, how do I trade off, a little better fit on firm sizes for a little worse fit on firm ages, right? That's going to be very subjective, right? So it turns out all the calibration and estimation is subjective in this sense. And so it's done very heuristically, where we just wiggle the parameters around. I mean, in essence, kind of follow a gradient, like we follow it up till we're happy with what comes out. So it turns out the estimation process, it's the kind of thing which we will run the model for a long time and just look for better better parameters, but it's not the kind of thing where it's going to take something like a year of CPU time or something. I mean, I do have experience with that in the sense that some of you will know that I worked on this model of the ancient American Pueblo people many years ago called the artificial Anasazi model. On that one, we really were able to have kind of a very simple calibration. I mean, simple conceptually. So that one really, we kind of burned up a couple of years of CPU time calibrating that one. But on this one, no, because it's just, yes, every model run takes 45 minutes, but then we can, once the model has reached a steady state, we can just kind of wiggle the parameters around and try to fit everything as well as we can.
Sounds a great approach. Thanks. A couple of questions in the chat. One, Mike Biffle has asked, what about boundary conditions, i.e. trade outside the US? Are stocks and flows of goods accounted for? Of
course, right. So we're completely neglecting that. But I guess one of the abstractions that we found in this model that's very surprising to us when we started the workout, we thought we would not be able to do this, is that we basically turned off the entire for example, high dimensional output stream. Initially we had individual firms producing individual goods like cars or appliances, whatever it was. We actually ended up turning that off. We just basically said firms produce output. That output gets sold and they pay their workers. And the key dynamics to making this model work was just, how do we model the flow of workers between firms? How do people change jobs? That's responsible for most of the fluctuations we see in the economy, according to this particular model.
Okay, and Tatiana has asked, thank you very much for the great overview. Could you tell us a bit more about the fork parallelization approach?
Right, so in essence, you've got, in this particular model, you have a large population of workers, employees, and then a large population of firms. And so we need to execute every one of them every period. So in this model now, a period is a month, and we're gonna have to model many hundreds of months in order to get it a steady state. So what we do is every single month, we're basically going to use threads. So in this case, just to be very concrete about it, this model is in C++, so it's C14 threads. So the C14 version of C++, and we're using the native threading package that comes with that version of C++. And that's, by the way, that's one of the standard compilers, whether you're using Microsoft or Xcode on the Apple or Unix C or anything. And so with those threads, we're just going to say, let's break the population up, whether it's the population of people or the population of firms, break it up into many pieces, and let each one of those pieces execute on each core. So basically, if I've got a 96 core box, what we typically find is, on the order of 100 threads works well, and we'll break the population up into 100 pieces. So if we have 100 million agents, we'll put 1 million agents on each thread, let it run, for that month, and then come back. Now, on the firms, the only trick is on the firms that the firms are not the same size, and the execution time is typically proportional to what the size of the firm is. So you have to just be a little bit tricky on doing what's called load balancing and saying, if I'm going to have a big firm and a small firm, I want to put a lot of firms onto one processor, and then the biggest firm goes onto its own processor too. So you just have to be careful of how you load balance when you have things that are quite skew in size.
Thanks. Okay, and there's one final question in the chat that I'll ask before we move on from Juan. Thanks, Rob, for your talk. Do the agents account for workers' skills? The fact that some jobs and industries are more skill demanding than others?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So yeah, so this model is not realistic at that level. It turns out we don't have very good data in these tax data. We don't have very good data anyway about what the workers' skills are. In the code, there are a bunch of parameters for what the skills could be. In the end, we just turned all that off, and I've showed you results for just the simplest possible model where. Now, but having said that, it's not the case that they're homogeneous workers in the sense that some workers really love income and are willing to work very hard. Some workers love leisure and don't want to work very hard. And so their agents are all heterogeneous, but they're not heterogeneous by skills. They're heterogeneous by their preference for income. And that seems to make the difference in terms of getting giant firms to form.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much again for your talk, Rob. There are other questions appearing in the chat, so if you have a chance to look at those, then please do. And also, we do have more time for discussion at the end of the session.
Very good. Thank you, Colin.
For now, we should move on to the next speaker, who is Brian Mac Namee from the University College in Dublin, where he's an associate professor and also director of the Centre for Research Training in Machine Learning. And Brian's research focuses on machine learning, predictive analytics, data visualization, and augmented reality, including in computer game applications. And Brian's going to talk about some of those methods, the potential for them in land use modeling. So over to you, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Callum. I hope you can see that okay.
Yep.
So thanks a million for the invitation to talk today. So as Callum said, I'm from University College Dublin in Ireland. And actually kind of picking up quite nicely from some of the discussion there from Rob about turning things on and off within the model. That's kind of the idea that I wanted to talk about here. So how much reality is enough for games, cows, and disease? And I kind of hooked this around. I was thinking of what could be interesting for this session as a way to bring in a few different pieces of work that I've done. I'm sure everybody has these sort of key papers that they read early on in their research careers. One of those for me was this paper, Real-Time Virtual Humans by Norman Badler. And he talks about this idea of virtual fidelity in modeling virtual humans. And essentially what it talks about is basically modeling as much reality as we need and looking at that question about, what's important to put into a model and what's not important to put into a model. And what I found is that I kind of find myself keep coming back to this idea again and again across sort of very many different things. So all the time stopping to think about, well, how much of this do we actually need to achieve what it is that we're trying to do in a particular scenario? So I want to give 3 quite different examples of where, that same idea has come up and the implications of that, and how, I guess, in some of these cases, this talks to the idea of simulating things at scale. So one of them in a game agent example, one to talk about some machine learning modeling that we're doing around propensity modeling, and in particular, in this case, propensity modeling for cows. And then the last piece in some agent-based modeling that we've been doing for infectious disease modeling. If I start with the first one, so intelligent agent for games is a big area, and there's a whole lot of work that goes on in it. And one of the nice things about it is there's lots and lots of tools that we can take advantage of from that area and use to do different things. Now, one thing that's always interesting is intelligent agent for games are all about cheating. I really like this book, The Illusion of Life, which is an old book by some Disney animators. And it sets up some really good ideas about how in that animation, it's this idea of the illusion of life that they're trying to create. And the little image on the right-hand side is, and maybe the sound will work if I turn that up.
Or did the word think escape your lip? Am I going mad? Or did the word think escape your lip?
And it's a nice example. So I don't know if anyone has ever done any animation courses or any animation training. One of the things that animators famously do is this idea of flower sack animations. So how much personality and how much of the illusion of life can you get into something as simple as a sack of flour? And it's amazing. Good animators can do this phenomenally well. And for intelligent agents in games, that's the idea a lot of the time, where what people are trying to do is to cheat to a certain extent, so that they can create basically the illusion that sophisticated behavior is going on. And I think that's worth making, as I suppose, making that point, that sometimes it looks like there's very interesting things that we can take from game agents to bring across into, let's say, behavioral models and other kinds of agent-based simulations that we want to build for, I suppose, more solid use cases. But sometimes we're a little bit surprised by that. But one idea that we can take across that's become very popular in game agent modeling, and we did some very early work on this, is around level of detail AI for intelligent game agents. So as game worlds start to scale, what people are looking to do is to enable themselves to have sophisticated agent behavior across these much bigger worlds. One of the things that's a challenge there is it's purely, I guess, a computation challenge at some point, that if we're going to have very large game worlds, having high level computation and high level sophisticated behavior for all of the agents within those game worlds becomes a real challenge. So level of detail approaches have become very common for that. The simplest example of that is if you think of something like path planning, which is important in a lot of game applications. When a player is paying attention to something and when they're going to see agents right up close, we would like to do very sophisticated path planning. We want to make sure that agents take nice paths and are animated very clearly doing that. However, if agents are not sort of in the immediate field of view, and if they're particularly not in the focus of the player of the game, well, then we can do the job of basically doing much simpler versions and versions that require much less computation. So like I say, we did some very early work in this, in applying this level of detail AI across sort of open world scenarios, and essentially being able to ratchet up the level of virtual fidelity at which agents within a game are simulated depending on where they are in relation to the player. And that's become really common now. And I just wanted to show a couple of examples, or highlight a couple of examples of that. So in sort of modern big open world games, the idea of level of detail simulation is used all the time. So here's a couple of examples and a couple of references. I know that the slides will be shared afterwards, to interesting talks from developers talking about how they've implemented this. So in big open world games like Assassin's Creed, or this slightly older one, The Driver, San Francisco, they use exactly these ideas where agents right up close to the player are simulated to a very high level of fidelity, and then agents further from the attention of the player are simulated to a much lower level of fidelity. Sometimes there's some interesting nuances there around not just basing that on spatial distance, but maybe trying to incorporate interesting measures about how important agents are to, let's say, the plot of a game or the action of a game. And there's some interesting developments there as well. So that was the first place where I wanted to show, some ideas of, slides went a bit mad there. Some ideas of this notion of virtual fidelity and moving up and down the levels at which we simulate things. The second example I want to give that was a much more example focused on machine learning. If people are familiar with, I'm sure everyone's familiar with machine learning at this stage, but propensity modeling is one of the big application areas of machine learning, where we're trying to use machine learning models to predict the propensity of certain behaviors or certain outcomes. It's used all over the place. One place that we're doing a lot of this at the moment is in agriculture. So in Ireland, certainly there's a big drive to look at how modern computational methods and the collection of data and data science in general can be applied within agriculture. We're doing a lot of work within that. And one place we're doing that is in detection of mastitis in dairy cows. So people who don't know, mastitis is a disease that dairy cows get. It's sort of the I suppose the most pressing disease within dairy farming. And if farmers can become aware early on that a cow is heading towards having a case of mastitis, they can intervene, they can prevent that. And in particular, one of the motivations here is to reduce widespread use of antibiotics, which is common within dairy farming, but is leading to all kinds of problems in terms of antimicrobial resistance. So what we're looking at is how we can use machine learning models to predict that cows are about to develop an instance of mastitis. So we do that in a few different ways. And sorry, these slides are not behaving themselves, but essentially what we do is we build a propensity modeling. We build models of propensity of cows to develop mastitis in the near future. So looking at this slide, basically based on data that we can collect today about milking that's taken place and a little bit of history of the milking that's taken place in the recent future, we can make a prediction at how likely a cow is to develop mastitis in the coming 7 days. In this case, tends to be the window that we look ahead. So we do that, and we use kind of standard machine learning models in order to do that. So we use gradient boosting models, if people are familiar with those. We have been testing this, working with collaborators in a research organization called Chagask in Ireland, and the company Accenture, using data sets covering the last 10 years of a large collection of dairy herds within that Chagask operate. And we can basically do this reasonably well. If my slides will behave for me again, we can do this reasonably well. So up in the sort of high or mid to high 80% in terms of accuracy for 1 day out. And then as we start to make our forecast kind of further into the future, the accuracy starts to creep down a little bit. So we've obviously been trying to improve on that. Let me make sure this will stop where I wanted to. And one of the ways we've been trying to improve on that is adding essentially the virtual fidelity in this case. So what other data can we collect to give us a more detailed picture of what's going on with the cows? And one piece of data that we've been working with there in association with company Dairy Master, who are a big agricultural technology firm, is looking at their sort of modern milking equipment that they have. They're able to, using sensors that they have on that equipment, we get a very detailed picture of what happened during the milking of a particular cow. So we get these what are called flow profiles. So essentially each one of these little blue lines is showing a milking event. So starting from when the milk started to be collected right through to when it ended. And this is a cumulative volume of the milk that was collected. And so what we're starting to do now is diving down into that much more detailed picture of what happened during the milking, is use this data and incorporate this data into our prediction models. This is pretty early work, but current work. The early indications of this is that we're going to get much more accurate models from doing this. So taking that same idea of figuring out, how much reality do we need? Well, modern sensors are giving us a potential to capture much more reality there, and it's really helping the models. The last example that I wanted to touch on was a specific agent-based modeling one. And this was work that I did in collaboration with a former colleague, John Kelleher, and our PhD student, Elizabeth Hunter. And we were looking at infectious disease modeling primarily within Ireland. But I guess Ireland is a good case of being, we refer to being a small enough to build, but big enough to prove. So Ireland has a population of about 5 million people. So it means we could potentially build sort of nationwide agent-based models. We were looking at agent-based models for infectious diseases. We use open data sources to populate these agent-based models. So using Central Statistics Office data, planning data for zoning, immunity data for things like schools. And we were initially started just simulating towns and counties within Ireland and the agent populations there. So using quite a high level of virtual fidelity. So simulating agents going to work, going to school, going home, going to places like playgrounds and sports centers and shopping centers. And the big advantage of that, I suppose, that people familiar with agent-based modeling will be familiar with, is the high level of heterogeneity that we get amongst different environments. So this is a table from a paper we published on this last year. I'll just highlight a couple of rows showing, I think, the advantage of this high level of virtual fidelity that we have in these models, where we have these 3 Irish towns, Scoil, Shanagolden, and Strokestown. And at a sort of basic level, they're quite similar. So about the same populations, about the same sizes. But in the agent-based model that we use, we end up with quite different results in terms of the simple idea here is running multiple simulations and looking at the percentage of outbreaks of, it was a measles infection that we were simulating within this particular paper. And this really shows the value that we get from agent-based modeling at a high level of virtual fidelity here, that because we're simulating, you know, the nuances of those towns, we get different outcomes. Whereas if we were using things like equation-based models, we'd probably just get exactly the same results for these 3 towns. However, when we try to do this at a national level, so as we try to scale this up to towards the whole country, but certainly multiple counties and multiple towns, we run into a challenge with just the computational requirements of that. And what we wanted to do, I suppose, following up for the kind of connects nicely to the previous talk, is just look at clever ways that we could solve that weren't buying bigger machines and so on. So what we moved towards was hybrid models where we adapt the level of virtual fidelity. So just like in the video games referred to at the start of the talk, that we can move up and down in terms of virtual fidelity. And one of the things that we found within infectious disease modeling is once infections take hold and the number of cases within an area start to creep up quite high, the value of the agent-based model starts to go down essentially. So the need for that heterogeneity that we get for agent-based models, we don't really get the payback from that. And the equation-based models that we might use work perfectly well at that stage. So what we did in this paper with this hybrid agent-based model was essentially set up a system where we would flip back and forth between the agent-based model and a much simpler equation-based model for disease transmission, depending on the rate of infections in particular areas. And what we found with that is we get very similar results, but with much less computation. So we played around with sort of different switching rules for how exactly you'd know whether to go up or down in terms of those, in terms of which level of granularity we were going to simulate at. And I think that's a nice example of taking exactly the same idea that we had in that game AI agent of moving up and down in terms of virtual fidelity and applying it to these infectious diseases-based agent-based models. So there are my 3 examples, hopefully to show within multiple kind of disparate domains, the idea of virtual fidelity and how much we need, well, just as much as is required for that particular action. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk about that today. And I'm delighted to answer any questions that people have.
Thank you very much, Brian. Very thought-provoking talk, plenty to cover in there. Once again, questions are welcome in the chat, in the online document where chat is continuing, or by raised hands in Zoom. And once again, I'm going to jump in while people are doing that, Brian, if I may. Yeah. Your examples are fairly data rich, obviously. You've got, you know, quite enviable data resources there. Do you think that's the limiting factor for other applications of these methods?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think I suppose if you take both the agent-based model at the end and the agricultural thing that we're doing, one of the advantages in both of those is we do have quite good data sets for those. And if we take the farming one, for example, one of the things that's interesting is we in Ireland have a national data repository. So basically every cow in the country, we have information about those cows in the same database. It's an advantage of the smallness, I suppose, that these things have emerged. So that means we do have really rich data sets, particularly that agricultural example. In the agent-based model that we were doing, driving that with open data sources, one of the things we were exploring that is sort of how far we could push that. And we do hit some walls in that in terms of the level of detail of the data that we have. So we had a number of data sources like the Central Statistics Office type data that's available in most places. But the amount of granularity that we have in that isn't always what you'd want. So we do kind of hit walls within that. So I think to apply these kind of different things, exactly having that rich data at the bottom to be able to go down to is really important. And is definitely a challenging thing that if you kind of bottom out in terms of where you can go with those data collections, you're going to get a little bit stuck.
Thank you. Further questions? Please feel free just to raise your hand if you want to just jump in there.
Well, Callum, you know I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to save mine until after all three
Sure.
speakers are completed.
Well, I will take the opportunity to ask you another one, Brian, if I may. It's slightly more speculative. Your idea of scaling the detail with which you simulate is really, really nice. I just wonder, we're interested in simulating land use change that may be quite different in the future. I wonder how much of a constraint that scaling of detail might place on emergent outcomes that we don't expect. If we stop the simulation when we think it's reaching something predictable.
So yeah, I think in the agent-based model of infectious disease, I guess that's the big question in terms of what are you losing when you make that switch. So that's one of the things we played around with that quite a bit, where we were trying to look at when outcomes would change as we made that switch. Now, exactly like you say, I suppose the advantage we have in that infectious disease scenario is there are reasonably solid expectations of how disease outbreaks are going to continue and what's going to happen. So it becomes that little bit easier to measure, well, what are we gaining and losing by the different switch points that we might implement here. Whereas, like you say, in that land use scenario where maybe the expectations are a little bit more uncertain, you're trying to look further into the future and look for that kind of emergent behavior. I think that could be a challenge in figuring out, well, when is it okay to move up and down? Now, I think sort of extracting out from the disease idea. So I suppose what we're looking for is when the agent, the heterogeneity that we get from the agent-based model is giving us a real advantage. So it's when there's, in that case, it's when infection rates are low. And I suppose it's looking for those, what are the equivalent metrics in a different scenario that you could use as the indicators of those good switching points. But I think that's the question exactly, that is what do you lose and what do you gain, and when's it okay to make those gains?
Thank you very much. Tatiana has asked a question in the chat, but I think looking at the time, we should probably move on. So if you wouldn't mind, Brian, monitoring the chat and the Google Doc and answering questions there if you can before the...
No problem at all.
Thank you very much again. So our final speaker is Professor Thomas Clemen from the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences, where he leads the Multi-Agent Research and Simulation Group, or MARS group, which has developed a distributed and scalable platform for agent-based modeling that's integrated with GIS. And today he's going to speak about virtual humans on Mars, concepts, AI, and interdisciplinarity. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me as a speaker. I'm really impressed about the talks we have heard today already, and I try to keep almost an equal level to this. Thank you. So I'm sorry for the pun. So the virtual humans. I'm Thomas, and I'm going to first introduce you to our research group MARS. The MARS group has been founded in 2010, and our intention was to develop a scalable framework for multi-agent systems. Since a couple of years, we are moving toward transdisciplinary AI, so bringing value, AI power, and value to different disciplines. Another focus of my research group is on spatial temporal data, and my specific research focus is on mimicking human and animal behavior. So MARS has been utilized and applied to a couple of disciplines like ecology, public health, national security, climate change mitigation, smart sustainable cities, and others. And besides, I'm a very enthusiastic bird watcher. Just let to know that I'm not just a computer scientist, but a living person. Okay, so a small piece of advertisement. If you would like to use Mars, then you're welcome to do so. It's free of charge. It's under the GNU private public license. You can download it. The links are here to our webpage and to the documentation server. The interesting part was, so the main idea was, as said, to provide a platform to run really large-scale multi-agent system scenarios. And just to give you an impression, the biggest model we have developed yet was on 2 billion of individual agents. And we run 1,000 scenarios in parallel. And it was like, yeah, adapting to the different states. This was a piece of working on cell biology and the detection of cancer. Yeah, as Callum said, I'm especially proud of the GIS integration. So it's quite easy to integrate vector and raster data directly from QGIS or from ArcGIS or others. But you know, it's written in C# and all the models are also written in C#. So it's quite a complex framework. And yeah, I would always suggest to participate one of our short courses. I come to it a little bit later. And yeah, for sure, it's sort of a nice team. I'm very proud of my team actually. So, but to end this advertisement, it's my absolute conviction that the technical framework is not so important as a proper conceptualization is. And so with that, I'm leaving this part to the discussion. The fundamental question is, in a context we are in here, is what is an agent? And there's actually no universal definition of that. Even in computer science, there are different perspectives what agents are. But I would put the focus on autonomy, to say I'm considering agents as autonomous software programs that can interact with the environment, they can sense the environment, they can interact with each other. If you're scaling up to multiple agents, then we are some kind of blueprinting this pattern of agents interacting with their environment, and yeah, and placing some kind of interaction and communication in between. The interesting part, and this is probably not new to this group, is that agents usually share a joint environment. So to summarize it, it's like you're having autonomous software programs and you place them on top of a joint, a common environment, and they can play with each other. It's literally, it's like a playboard game where you have different layers of the board, and then you put the different tokens on them, and then they can run after rules defined, or other ways of describing the behavior. So the next question I would like to raise is, why do we need to consider multiple agents? Wouldn't it be enough to describe one agent? this agent behave within this, in its environment, and then transfer the result to the entire system. And so my response to questions like that is that we are especially interested in seeing what we are seeing here. This is a flock of European starlings, and it's what we are calling self-organization and emergent patterns. So we're looking for something what is not in the individual, but in the interaction between the individuals. So the next question is, how many starlings make a swarm? And you can somehow prove this next autumn in the northern hemisphere, when you're looking the bird migration and the time when the starlings group together. So when would you say a swarm, a flock of starlings is really a flock, or it's a larger family, or it's a, you know, and this question is not really easy to answer. In fact, I would like to show some examples from those emergent patterns from our experiments on pedestrian movement. The first one is, yeah, you probably know this from if you're running or going through some subway tunnels during rush hour, and there are large crowds of people trying to rush in or rush out. And what we can observe in real life and in the models is some kind of a lane formation behavior. Another one is group aggregation and separation. And you hopefully we will see this again after the pandemic. If you're doing shopping on a Saturday with friends, and you're staying together and doing chatting all the time, and going into shops, having a cup of coffee or something, and this group of people, they're staying together. It's some kind of a group, a social ensemble, right? And the other peoples are somehow moving around them. And this is this is an emergent pattern we can observe in reality, and we can also use this pattern as well as the lane formation for validation of models. And the last one is, yeah, it's called arcing. It's if you have a bottleneck, for example, if you consider an evacuation scenario and you have a bottleneck, an emergency exit, and the people are crowding in front of this, then it's this pattern is very often found. Unfortunately, this pattern is the reason for a couple of fatalities in scenarios like yesterday happened in Israel. So when we are balancing the number of agents we want to consider, then it would be nice to know how many agents do we actually need. And the question is, when does emergence appear in our models? And this is not some kind of a linearity. It's just a threshold, and this can happen if the number of agents exceed a threshold, or if the interaction complexity is high enough to that emergent pattern can be observed, or the length of the simulation time, the tick length, delta t, the simplicity of rules like the Reynolds-Boyds, you probably know, but also the intelligence of the agents in terms of cognitions and learning capabilities. And I would like to briefly step into the artificial intelligence area. And I brought a picture from Bali this, as an example for a land use scenario. And I also brought a generic agent with me. And in a generalized way, this agent can perform actions to the environment. And the agent can also observe the impact or the reaction to this is mainly what we are having seen in agent-based models since decades. But what we're now putting into is that each agent can have an individual cognition, can develop personal traits, experiences, having individual goals, social groupings, and putting expected rewards onto the interaction between the environment and the agent itself. And if you scale that up to millions or sometimes billions of agents, then the resulting dynamic can be very, very complex. And there's a good chance to find something completely new, and you're raising questions to the disciplines. The title of the seminar today was like, what can land use modelers learn from computer science or from other disciplines? The title was. I would like to ask the other way around. What can computer scientists learn from land use modelers? And I would like to, some kind of provocative, put a typical interdisciplinary interaction between computer science and other domains here. The computer scientists ask, tell us about your problem. We will code something. And the domain expert said, oh, provide an R package to us, we will deal with the rest. But sorry, this is not interdisciplinarity, right? And the question is how we can get better. For example, in our short courses, I will come to it in a minute, we are working with tandem teams. So tandems from computer science and from other disciplines. And they are trying to establish a trustful collaboration and working on a model together. This could be a start, but there's very much to learn from as well. The question is, maybe I would say there's no question that land use modeling can, that there can be a value to land use modeling from computer science. I put some stuff here. We can have this later in the discussion, especially on parallel computation. We work with Kubernetes in a cloud environment with good and bad experience with that, artificial intelligence and all this stuff. But the question is how we can work together more efficiently. And I would like to put your focus on the short course on social-ecological modeling and simulation. We ran in different places around the world. We found that either the computer scientists and the domain specialists learned a lot from working with each other in such an environment. And with that, I would like to raise some take-home messages and thoughts for discussion. You're probably here because you know what multi-agent modeling and simulation is for, and the value of it. I would state that the identification of emergent patterns requires a critical number of interacting agents. I would also suggest that the modeling, the teaching modeling should focus on conceptualization rather than on tools. My hope is that I can learn from you regarding interdisciplinarity in this community. And yeah, let's run a short course on your university together. It's yeah, it's almost free of charge. And yeah, at the final end, I bring the a selfie from Percy, because my title was yeah, about something with Mars. And with that, I'm closing my presentation for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Thomas. Plenty of thoughts there for the discussion, which is great. We can have a couple of quick questions directly to Thomas before we go into the discussion. So please add them to the chat or raise your hand as before. I saw there was one already in the online document where there's a lively discussion ongoing, which was from Tatiana, and that was asking, what's the largest number of agents that you've simulated in Mars, and what are your experiences with parallelizing those agents?
So I got so what was the highest number of agent?
Yes.
Oh, it was 2 billion individual cells developed as agents, as individual agents. And yeah, and the second question was regarding parallelization. So yeah, we used to work with cloud computing to parallelize the simulation execution. But this is very promising indeed. But we found that that if the complexity of calculation within the agents itself, if this complexity is not if it's too low, then the overhead of the communication overhead within the cloud environment will yeah is destroying the advantages of the cloud computing approach. So let me say the Kubernetes cloud computing stuff is very promising if you have a complex rules, complex AI rules within the agents, but just a short simulation step because of the paradigm behind. But if the communication overhead is much higher than the calculation within the agent, then I would recommend to go on a multi CPU or GPU cluster. It's just a balance depending on the rules and the agent complexity.
Thank you. Great. There are other questions coming up, but I think looking at time, we really need to move on to the general discussion now. So perhaps, Thomas, you'll also have time afterwards to look at the additional questions in writing.
Yeah, sure.
And for now, I'm going to hand over to Derek Robinson to chair the discussion.
Thank you, Callum. I'm Derek Robinson from the University of Waterloo, and it's been a great session today. I also had some fun time this week reading everyone's papers prior to the discussion. So if you're on here and you haven't checked out the papers from Rob Axtell, Thomas Clemen, and Brian Mac Namee, I highly recommend that you do so. I'm going to ask a discussion question for all three of you that stems from one of the last slides in Thomas's presentation, because I think it's a nice segue into a discussion. And on slide 10, one of the last slides there, you're poking some fun at the relationship between the land use modelers and the computer scientists, and saying, well, just build an R package and we'll make something happen there. And I love it because there's a lot of people that feel that way, and sometimes the modelers don't know what they want, and the computer scientists don't know what is the most useful thing to build to help out in a particular discipline. And in reading some of your works this week, I was quite enjoying your papers, Thomas, about the work in Africa and elephants, and coupling global vegetation models with species distribution models and elephant agent-based modeling behavior. And in that paper, I'm going to stretch some of your words a little bit and say that you were suggesting that maybe creating frameworks and decision support tools are more useful than creating models for specific research questions. And that way we can use the models for answering more broader types of questions as well. Rob, in some of your work that you have in progress at the moment, you're hitting on some of the challenges that we face as a collective science in building large-scale agent-based models, and suggesting that maybe there's some ways to progress by having individual disciplines really push forward, and that some of those individual disciplines that have a focused sense of purpose might be a way for us to get at these larger scale behavioral models. And so I think, to me, this kind of brings up this idea that we've got individual researchers or research teams building models, and then we've got some other kinds of community models that are underdeveloped. And as we try to move forward to build these large scale models, maybe I could get your insights into what are the benefits of each of those two approaches. And if someone's looking to move into this direction, how would you suggest they move forward?
It's a good question, Derek, and maybe I can start if it's okay.
Sure, thanks, Rob.
Well, let me just mention that one model that I did not mention, but maybe which is somewhat more relevant to you guys' community, the land use community, and is also a full-scale model, but it's just not a very large-scale model, is some of you may have seen the work that I've been involved with on what's called the Poseidon model of fisheries. Now, Poseidon is a collaborative effort of a team from Oxford and UC Santa Barbara, and also like Hawaii, Arizona State, a bunch of places, even Princeton. But the idea was to take an environment where we have, once again, exhaustive data. So in this case, it's going to be for the ground fishery that's off the U.S. West Coast that runs from California up to, actually runs all the way to past Vancouver. There's basically about 100 trawlers that run that entire fishery, and for those 100 trawlers for the last decade, when I'm painting with a coarse brush here, for the last decade, there's basically exhaustive data on every day where they've been, what they've done, how many fish they caught, what kind of gear they were using, etc. And so there's this in essence logbook data on a daily basis for these 100 trawlers. Okay, now those data are highly they have privacy concerns for those data, so those data are housed at Santa Barbara. And so I just report, Derek, that vis-a-vis your question, is that in order to really kind of get the most out of those data, it requires some fisheries experts. But in order to build the Poseidon model code-wise, it took agent-based modeling pros. But I think the real glue between the two groups were basically people who were fishery scientists who knew both the domain and they knew what kind of models they wanted to build. And maybe the final thing to say about it is that maybe vis-a-vis one of the questions in the discussion, written discussion, is it was also the case that at Santa Barbara there are some good experimentalists and experimental economists, and so having those people involved, at least tangentially, was also helpful in figuring out how do we actually model the behavior. So my sense was that that's just an example of an interdisciplinary team involving agent-based modelers, fishery scientists, basic kind of data specialists, as well as experimental economists, and that kind of heterogeneous group, although it's taken a couple of years to get up and running, my sense is it's a great way to produce kind of models that no one particular clique of those people could ever have done, right? It produced somehow the whole is more than the sum of the parts, and I think that's at least one recipe. But now it requires a stomach of being able to defer your work for a couple of years while you get everything up and running, and it also took a big pot of money to make that all happen too, thanks to a big American foundation. So that's one answer anyway.
Thanks, Rob. Thomas or Brian, do you guys have any thoughts on that question?
Fine. Do you want to go?
Thomas, do you want to go ahead? Then I'll join in after you.
So I think we need to separate models that do what we call number crunching in computer science, or behavioral models. So from my perspective and from my experience, the behavioral models are more related to the original idea of agent-based models or multi-agent systems, because usually when we're giving talks on multi-agent systems, the other disciplines start with, yeah, we would like to do multi-agent system modeling, but we don't have enough data. And then my usual return is, you don't need data. You need some knowledge about your system. So mass modeling is more on putting hypotheses into a system and then press a run button and see what happened. And it's not like in machine learning that you're having a whole bunch of data and you're putting this into an algorithm and see what happens. There's no 42 coming out of the pipeline, right? It's just you're seeing. So Derek, you mentioned the elephant model, the Kruger National Park model. It's not like we know how elephants move, but together with South African national parks, we grabbing small pieces of knowledge about elephant behavior out of the literature and put this into the model. And the actual elephant agent is very, the only 100 lines of code or something. It's not complex in terms of software. But on the other hand side, if you let this model run without filtering, then you're producing terabytes of output data, right? Because, you know, there are 20,000 elephants. We have 20 million trees in the Kruger National Park and so on. And they're running in a step size of data T 1 second. Then you're producing 900 terabytes every year. And it's more than looking for a needle in a haystack if you want to fetch the piece of information from that. So the first step from my perspective, and then back to your question, is, and the most important step is what we are looking for. What is the research question we are looking for? And then developing the model from there onward. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
Derek, I was going to add just something small to that. I think to agree with what's been said by Rob and Thomas about the importance of collaboration in machine learning. There's a real danger of that, and we joke sometimes of turning up with a laptop and the wrong shoes to some new domain to say, oh, we can solve this. Stand back, everybody. So the collaboration is really important here, but maybe one flip side of that around building tools that are easy to use, and maybe how there's an inherent often danger in that. The other way around is there's been a nice article recently on, it was Nature Machine Intelligence, looking at a systematic review of all of the image-based machine learning systems that have been built and published about for looking at X-rays and diagnosing COVID-19 in those X-rays. And essentially the conclusion is none of them are any good. And part of that argument is machine learning people diving into this domain they don't really know about. But the other part of it is that there are really nice tools and packages for machine learning now. So there is the danger of people who don't know about machine learning coming from the other way and building bad models. So I think that's a flip side of how handing over the OR package isn't perfect either.
Right. And I'll get to the questions in the discussion section in one moment. I've got one more question for everyone. Again, because you guys are giving me some really good segues here. Thomas, your point about number crunching versus behavioral models, and Brian, I really liked your differentiation on the level of detail and structure in the agent-based models with, in your example on the slide was distance, but then noting that there's other plot related agents that are important to have detailed behaviors. And this comes into a lot of different fields where they're using things like dynamic meshes for areas where there's high detail and activity required, and other areas where there's less. And so as we go to these large scale behavioral models, and as Rob argues, we've got more data about human characteristics and activities than we've ever had. But we could also argue, and I think most of you would agree with me, that these data don't give us insight into why decisions are made or how these decisions are made. So they're not always giving us the depth of understanding that we might require in order to nudge the system in a certain direction we want. And I love it how, Rob, you're talking a lot about using these aggregate data as targets. And so if these aggregate data don't give us the depth of human behaviors and decision making, and we have to come up with those conceptually or theoretically, sometimes through detailed case studies, how do we avoid the problem of equifinality and getting those aggregate outcomes from a variety of different behavioral representations that we don't have empirical data on?
It's a good question, Derek. And as I thought about it, I'll jump in here first. And let's say that it is a common saw of anti-agent-based modeling people, of which you are not, of course, to raise this issue and say, one of the problems with ABMs is that many different micro behaviors could produce the same outcome. And as opposed to being a flaw, it seems to me that that's actually, instead of it being a bug, it seems to me it's a feature, in the sense that is the way science works, right? The way science works is, look, there are many explanations for gravity. There's, the Greek explanation, which is crappy. There's Newton's, which is better, and there's Einstein's, which is an improvement, right? You have multiple explanations, and you then adjudicate which one works better, and you adopt the one that works better. This is science. This is not now. If in fact you can say there's 18,000 different explanations for some phenomena, that's problematical. Although we can always use machine learning to reduce which ones are the best, right? Anyway, my point is just that we want to basically say, hopefully we can say there are in fact multiple theories of why this thing happens, and now we can, for example, run an experiment at the micro level and say which one looks right compared to what people really do, or that kind of thing. So I think it's a curiosity that people who are used to solving for Nash equilibrium in the social sciences, or people who are natural scientists used to solving for the unique solution, are really they view the multiplicity aspect of ABM as being problematical. Where I really believe we should view it as a it's a feature, not a bug. I mean, it really means that think about just some common social process like marriage. There's a sociological theory of marriage. There's an economic theory of marriage. There's all the anthropological theories of marriage. They're all different theories. They all have some germ of truth. The real trouble with all the different competing theories is that they're more or less mutually exclusive. When we imagine we actually could build an ABM with rich specifications of marriage, we actually could have kind of a comprehensive theory. My point is just that I think that there are going to be multiple micro specifications to produce the same aggregate output, and then ultimately, though, I mean, one easy way to figure out what's going on at the micro level is right is just to have a ton of data, right? And the more data you get, the more you're going to exclude certain explanations. And so, I think this is just the normal progress of science.
Okay, and that's, maybe I should have pushed the question a little further and say, how do you deal with that challenge? And as you were showing in your presentation, you've kind of got a pattern-oriented modeling approach where the more patterns you can get from the data, the more that you feel like you're on the right track. Is that correct?
Right. And then what I wrote on the Google document too, I wrote even further, that's we now have today, we now have another, twice as many patterns as we had, say, a few years ago. And we don't have explanations for those things. So in a world of having incredible amounts of data, I mean, we have many data series we still can't explain. So it seems to me that right, it's the idea now happens that you have to now build on models and build ever better models to explain more and more of the data. So exactly right, Derek. As I think there's a natural way in which we can imagine honing our models. But I think that the curious thing we're faced with today in this big data era is that all of a sudden all these data are dumped on us, and many of the existing theories, many of the existing approaches are not very powerful for these things. Don't do a very good job explaining all those data, and we're left with this weird situation where, let's say, the vested interests are not that interested in trying to bring their old-fashioned models to all these new data. And so we have to fight these territorial fights as to, with everybody, I'm sure in this audience has experienced fighting with journal editors for trying to say what's new and different about your paper versus what's come before.
And lots of different types of data as well.
Of course, yeah.
And Thomas, how do you guys deal with this issue?
Yeah, I would say there are two aspects I would like to raise. The first is, from my experience, one of the major values of especially agent-based modeling is that we're raising questions. We're producing new questions to the domains, because in the past, at least some of the other disciplines, they felt very convenient with descriptive statistical analysis. Since we're dealing with complex adaptive systems, there's no way of dealing such a system dynamics with linear regressions or something, because you cannot tell if the state trajectory that grows linear from the past to now will go further into the future, right? There's no way of telling. The second aspect is that if you're specifically looking to emergent patterns, then this is more or less equivalent of looking to the long tail in probability distributions. You're looking not to the average behavior, but you're looking to outliers. And the outliers can give you a very valuable insight to the inherent system dynamic of the complex system. And from my perspective, the average behavior is quite boring. And Rob said, yeah, we're having a huge bunch of data we cannot explain with our models yet, right? But I think it's one reason is that we are looking for average data and average models and average behavior, and we are not looking to the long tails. And this, just to bring an example from autonomous driving. In autonomous driving, this long tail brings most of the fun, but most of the risk. If there's a very famous example, if you put a snowman right on the middle of the road, what is the autonomous car doing with that? Because this is more than the long tail. It never happened before. The autonomous car never appeared to see a snowman in front on the road, right? So the reaction of the autonomous car is not defined. And this is what we are looking for, the left and right from the Gaussian distribution.
Right, and the idea of stationarity and non-stationarity in your response is something that's going to come up across both time and space, as we've talked a little bit about space already. Brian, did you want to chime in there at all?
Yeah, only to say I really agree, and I think the use of agent-based models almost as an exploration tool, we found some really good conversations that where people like that have a sort of a fixed model. They say, look, this is the average behavior that we expected, but it's not happening. And we see it happen sometimes, it doesn't happen, but we can't figure out what it is. And being able to use an agent-based model as a tool to explore that and see where the variety is, we found it a great collaboration tool and opened up kind of really interesting conversations with people.
Yeah, it's a great medium for discussion and synthesis of knowledge for sure. So I'm going to go to the discussion board, and we've got a question from Jerry's son. Jerry asks about the massive number of agents with highly detailed attributes and behaviors. potentially better illustrate the detailed dynamics of the system under study. It may also reduce the burden of abstraction and conceptualization for modelers. And I think that's a point that Rob was talking about earlier. But this also comes with a hefty prize: difficulty in parameterization, calibration, validation, visualization. So his question is whether the benefit of large-scale ABMs outweighs the cost.
So I get this question all the time. So let me just, I'll weigh in here first and say that as many of you guys will know, I mean, the default model in economics, in particular for policy, you know, I sit in Washington, so for policy purposes, is the representative agent model, which, I mean, as fantastic as this sounds, I mean, even today at all central banks around the world, I mean, this is scary for how how our economy is running, but is that models with one agent, right? One representative consumer, one representative firm. Those are called DSG models. That's how policymakers run the economy. And they basically imagine that that those representative entities are just multiply them by 300 million, and you're going to get all the consumers, or multiply by 6 million, you get all the firms. The main point to say is that there is a natural bound between that we're currently working on, which is to have one agent. And then so when I go up to 100 million, the most common question I will get is say, well, couldn't you gotten by with 12 or 42, right, or whatever it is, right? And the answer is probably. But I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier, and I said it too fast, but say that it's actually incredibly cathartic to after having been running models at small scale and having to when you have many different outputs, you say, I've got to renormalize this thing by scale, right? I mean, things, just think about basic statistics that we all understand, that whenever you have a fluctuation variable, the fluctuations are going to scale with the size of the system. So if you have a system that's not at full scale, your output models, your output is not going to look like the output of the real thing. So on a whole variety of metrics, you have to rescale the output if you're working on a smaller scale. So it's simply, I mean, I can even remember here, report to you guys, it was incredibly just a happy day when we could finally run at full scale. You could say the output of my model should just look like the output of the real world. That's incredibly powerful. Now, my belief is that once you start working at full scale, very smart postdocs and other people are going to tell you, well, we actually could scale this thing back by a factor of 10 and it's still going to work. Okay, fine. That's fine. But let's get to full scale and see what happens, and then start scaling back, not come up with some, if you excuse my English, some BS model that's running at at 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1 compression, and you just have no idea what the aggregation biases are in that model. So I'm happy to work at smaller than full scale, but I think go up to full scale first and then back off, as opposed to saying I'm going to make a great improvement on the central bank model by saying I'm going to have 10 agents instead of 1. Well, your 10 agents are still going to be very full of aggregation bias.
Right. I'm having a little laugh here thinking about how your days of Sugarscape to a full scale model must have been a fantastic moment for you.
Come a long way, Derek. That's right. Even the first version of the firms model that I just talked about today too, we wrote that on the Sugarscape hardware. So that was, that really had just about 1,000 agents, right? And go from 1,000, 10 to the 3rd to 10 to the 8th. That's really been the last 20 years of hardware evolution. So.
Right. Brian, can you comment on that question about how the benefits outweigh the costs?
Yeah, I guess I think Rob has captured it really well there, except the only thing I suppose to add is maybe that idea of, the just enough virtual fidelity. But I guess it's finding that sweet spot is the tricky thing, and you can always keep going. So finding that. So I think and I suppose this is one of the challenges about the idea of agents as an exploration tool and things like that. Is that, yeah, sometimes we don't know what the target is, so it becomes tricky. But I think that's what we always keep in mind. And to flip it around to machine learning again, we use the same idea of, and it's always a little bit easier in machine learning where we have maybe good metrics for targets, but we want just enough model complexity. So if our simple model works, well, we should stop, and we shouldn't go and start piling in all those sort of exciting new ideas that we've heard. And I think it's the same thing. It's always trying to find that line where we think we have enough. But that depending on the domain and depending on the application, that can be definitely quite tricky.
Thanks, Brian. Thomas, could you comment on how you see the benefits outweighing the costs? And then Callum, could you close out with the last question by Tatiana on the Google Doc? There's some landscapers that are being quite loud here, and I don't want to intercept this conversation with it.
Yeah, the question regarding benefits. So I've shown the slide with the threshold, how many agents you actually need to observe emergent patterns in your simulation scenario, right? And I would say that, yeah, like Rob and Brian also said, that it's, yeah, we need to keep the balance. If you're having 100 millions of agents, then you need to be aware that you need to handle big data in the simulation results, and you need a strategy for this, and you need to proper filtering, and you need to think about how to visualize the simulation results in a suitable way. For example, we are currently developing a decision support tool, a so-called digital twin of the traffic system of Hamburg in northern Germany, with 2 million of citizens, with multimodal planning. They have their own day plans with adaptive learning and so on, with a connection to the sensor network of Germany. They can adapt to the weather, to sensor bike sharing station and so on. And this is horrible complex. You know, if you're not filtering the results, then we're producing so much data that you cannot deal with that in the aftermath. Even if you can store this somewhere, but you cannot visualize 2 million individual agents, especially when they're deciding for their own, and they're running and moving around and getting their vaccinations and all that stuff, what is happening in Hamburg currently. But you cannot observe the traffic, the daily traffic jams, if you're just considering, let me say, 1,000 agents in the area of Hamburg. And you cannot observe traffic jams if you're just considering a very small part of Hamburg. So it's like the balancing the geographical extent and the number of agents to be considered with again, with the research question you want to place to the system. If you need a quick response, then you need some kind of an aggregation. If you want to understand the dynamic of the entire system, like Rob said, then you need to think big. So, yeah, it's not like, yeah, there is. I don't think this is a golden path. I think this could be a fundamental and relevant step for interdisciplinary work, actually.
Thank you, Thomas. I know there is another very good question from Tatiana and several others in the online document, but we are running fairly substantially over time, so I think we'd better leave it there now. Apologies to people who didn't get their questions answered directly, but the online document will stay there, so perhaps we can continue the discussion to some extent there. And we'll also send out links to the recording of the webinar and some further details, hopefully after the event. So thank you very much once again to the speakers for your wonderful presentations today. They were really all fascinating and did amount to more than the sum of their parts. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you all for attending also. And we look forward to further webinars in the series in the future.